purposefully propagate unfounded claims of misinformation, undermining the integrity of the council meeting. Inability to address concerns. Anonymous letters often lack the necessary details or content to effectively address the concerns raised. Without a means of contacting the author for additional information or clarification, it may be challenging to understand the full scope of the issue and take appropriate action. The mayor's role is to gather reliable information and facilitate productive discussions, which is challenging with anonymous correspondence. Protection of privacy. Anonymous letters may contain sensitive or personal information about individuals. Reading such content in a public setting violates the privacy and rights of those mentioned in the letter. Respecting privacy is important to maintain trust and ensure fair treatment of individuals within the community. Focus on productive discussions. City council meetings have limited time for agenda items and public participation. Reading an anonymous letter may divert valuable time and attention from important matters that require thoughtful discussion and decision-making. Prioritizing items that contribute positively to the community's well-being is crucial for an effective and efficient council meeting. Legal considerations. Anonymous letters can sometimes contain defamatory or libelous content. By reading such content in a public forum without verifying its accuracy, the mayor and the city council may expose themselves to potential legal risks. It is essential to adhere to legal guidelines and avoid disseminating unverified or potentially harmful information. Instead of reading anonymous letters during a council meeting, the mayor can encourage individuals to provide feedback or express concerns through established channels such as public forums, official correspondence, or public hearings. These channels allow for a more structured and accountable approach to addressing community concerns while maintaining the integrity and productivity of a council meeting. I called this an anonymous letter because I didn't write it, but ChatGPT did. Artificial intelligence wrote that letter to the council. All I did was give them a prompt, and it took about 30 seconds. Now I can say those points are very valid. I can own them. If I want to say these are valid considerations, I sign that. But I think the council needs to be aware of the risks of anonymous letters because you don't know the origins. It could be artificial intelligence. In the same way that if someone is going to read as a council member a letter from a citizen, I would hope that we'd check to verify that that citizen is actually the one that wrote the letter and that you have the permission of that person to read that letter in public for all kinds of reasons. So I think that amongst the other suggestions I made in the past about how to improve procedures, and you should review them again. I know you delayed looking at making some changes in how these meetings proceed. I think it's time to go back and review those and add to it, not reading anonymous letters. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Public hearings, I see none. Consent agenda.
Move approval.
Second. Have a approval and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Resolutions and ordinances. Item A, a resolution establishing appropriations within the general fund for expenditure of an unforeseen specific purpose grant from the State Historic Preservation Office, Oregon Heritage. Staff report by Finance Director, Ms. Likens.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The city's received a grant in the amount of $6,000 from the State Historic Preservation Office, Oregon Heritage. The grant is to be used specifically to provide funding for a consultant to conduct a market analysis for the historic district. In order to spend this money lawfully, the city must comply with requirements of local budget law. It is staff's recommendation that the City Council adopt the resolution to establish appropriations for the use of the grant funds as for the purpose stated in the amount of $6,000.
Any questions? Resolution number.
2096.
Madam Mayor, I move that the council adopt resolution 2096.
Second.
We've got a motion with a second. All those will the recorder please call the roll?
Councilor Narity?
Aye.
Councilor Savage?
Aye.
Councilor Stennett?
Aye.
Councilor Dreer?
Aye.
Councilor Irvin?
Aye.
Youth Representative?
Aye.
Councilor Fleck?
Aye.
Mayor Solsky.
Aye.
Thank you.
Item B, a resolution approving transfer of public transportation assets from the City of Cottage Grove to Lane Transit District. Staff report by Mr. Boone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. So the city's been managing transportation grants from the Oregon Department of Transportation to provide funding for public transportation efforts through South Lane deals for a number of years. It has become apparent over the last year that necessary staff time to continue managing these grants has significantly increased and is likely to become unsustainable going forward. Accordingly, staff began looking for partners with experience and capacity in public transportation grant management and reporting to either assist or entirely take over those responsibilities. After extensive discussions, Lane Transit District has agreed to take over the city's transportation efforts starting on July 1st of this year. As a part of this transfer of responsibility, ODOT requires a letter from the Cottage Grove City Council and from LTD's Board of Directors authorizing the transfer of existing grant obligations between the two entities. The attached resolution would serve as that letter and would transfer the right to take possession of 2 grant-funded buses, ordered but not yet delivered, from the city to LTD, along with the obligations associated with the same. And it is staff's recommendation that council approve the resolution.
Resolution number.
2097.
Councilor Flack?
Madam Mayor, I move that the council adopt resolution 2097.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the recorder please call the roll?
Counselor Irvin?
Aye.
Youth Representative?
Aye.
Counselor Fleck?
Aye.
Counselor Merity?
Aye.
Counselor Savage?
Aye.
Counselor Stennett?
Aye.
Counselor Dreer?
Aye.
Mayor Solsky?
Aye. Okay. Item C, a resolution granting multiple unit property tax exemption, the MUPD, to Pine Springs LLC. Staff report by the city planner, Mr. Mongan.
Good evening, thank you, Mayor and Council. Before the City Council is an application for the MUPD program submitted by property owner Pine Springs LLC for the 121 unit project. Was considered approved by the Planning Commission via Master Plan Development application and has now an approved overlay concept plan. The approved Master Plan Development includes the development of 17 buildings, with 16 of them being multi-unit 2-story residence structures, and the 17 being leasing offices and management residence. This application meets up the eligibility criteria, specifically location of the development site is on or within a quarter mile of an LTD route, and that 3 or more dwellings are proposed within the development. As part of the application, the City Council should review the public benefits components required in order to qualify for the exemption provided in Chapter 3.10. The applicant must propose and agree to provide 1 or more design elements benefiting the general public, but not necessarily the public at large, as stated in subsection 3.10.050. The applicant has proposed the following public benefits. Parks and recreation facilities addressing the excess open space in excess of the minimum requirement of 15%. Pedestrian-oriented design features, support of the mass transit being along the route, the direct connection, facilities for folks with disabilities, per building code, 2% of units will be required to be ADA accessible, as Councilor Mary pointed out. That will be about 2.4 units. Staff can discuss with the applicant, rounding up to 3. Special architectural features in excess of the minimum criterion for the zone. Development or redevelopment of underutilized blighted properties. A significant portion of the site is blighted due to the decommission or condemned former Village Green Resort, at least on the north end, which had to be torn down. Other associated extra costs with environmental cleanup include $200,000 in asbestos removal and demolition. They're also proposing on-site stormwater retention facilities. Let's see, some other notes provided by the applicant include that 40 hotel room beds were donated, bed frames, TVs, art, a bridge was donated to the city golf course. That's the list of provided design elements to be public benefit. The attached resolution has been prepared for council adoption if council wishes to approve of the application. It is recommended that the City Council consider whether to approve the attached application for multi-unit property tax exemption program submitted by Pine Springs LLC pursuant to Chapter 3.10 of the Municipal Code. The application meets the criteria as outlined in sections 3.10020 and 3.10050, showing the location on or within a quarter mile of density buffer, 3 more units, and public benefits as described above. If the council desires to approve of the application, attached resolution. Regarding the cost, as has been discussed in previous MUPT applications presented to council, it's a very difficult task to estimate the potential abatement value of multifamily developments, given that the assessor's office has 3 different mechanisms for determining taxable value. While it's most likely that the calculation would be done using a cost to income analysis, basically how much does it cost to run the facility versus how much it rents, it still is not a number that the county is really excited about being estimated for. They prefer to just wait until it hits the rolls. That said, staff can state that without the program, these 121 units likely would not be constructed, resulting in the loss of 121 dwellings, but also the loss of the $17 million investment in the community. An application of $840 was paid for consideration of this application.
Councillor Fleck.
Madam Mayor, I am actually really impressed. I know we've had some conversations about the public benefit piece, and it just really seems like these folks have gone way out of their way to make sure that this is a really wonderful development. And with that, I'll move that resolution 2098 be adopted.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Anyone else? Any questions?
Yes, I would just like to go on record. I know we're in the process of revising the MUPT, but I would think that we're approaching the satiation point of market rate housing and that we must include affordability in any future MUPTs.
Anyone else? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Counselor Stennett?
Aye.
Counselor Dreer?
Aye.
Counselor Urban?
Aye.
Youth Representative?
Aye.
Counselor Fleck?
Aye.
Counselor Merity?
Aye.
Counselor Savage?
Aye.
Mayor Solsey?
Aye. Okay. Business from the City Council. Item A, Annual Urban Forestry Committee Report. Staff report by City Planner, Mr. Mongan.
Thank you, Mayor. Chair Riley, I'm sure the Forestry Committee will present this.
Hello. I like to call this my State of the Trees address. You know, it's all very fancy. So all 7 seats on the Urban Forestry Committee were filled and are filled at this time. Deborah Bartlett and Mark McCaffrey are newest members of the committee. Deborah brings to the committee her experience in running a nonprofit organization called We Plant the World, which works to plant trees in areas around the world. Mark McCaffrey is a certified arborist and brings in his expertise in land use planning, wildland firefighting, and as an employee of the City of Springfield's Public Works Division. Deborah and Mark, along with our longtime committee members, Susan Johnson, Jamie Schapper, Ona Chambers, and Paul Higgins, are making their mark here in Cottage Grove's urban forest, and we anticipate more great things to come over the next few years. The city has received its 29th Tree City USA Award this year. The Tree City USA Award is given to cities who meet specific criteria as established by the Arbor Day Foundation. These criteria include things like having an annual Arbor Day day or month proclamation, hosting an Arbor Day celebration like this last year's tree giveaway, maintaining an urban forestry committee, including the number of hours that the committee spends on urban forest related activities and events, maintaining our tree ordinance, and spending at least $2 per capita on urban forestry related programs. The city received its 6th Growth Award from the Arbor Day Foundation this year. So the Growth Award program is used by the Arbor Day Foundation to encourage Tree City USA members to go beyond those minimum standards for Tree City USA Awards. And this year, the city received a Growth Award for its 2020 2022 designation as the Oregon Tree City of the Year, having a fully staffed urban forestry committee, and the reclamation of the timber from those coastal redwoods trees that were moved from G Street. So this year, the city planted 50 new street trees in areas of the community where there was insufficient tree canopy along the right-of-way. This included the planting of 2 flowering dogwoods that replaced those coastal redwoods from G Street. 10 street and right-of-way tree removal requests were considered by the Urban Forestry Committee, and these trees were in various parts of town, and they were considered individually by the committee with technical support and evaluations performed by the city's arborist, Chris Centers. So while it's important to reflect on this year's successes, it's also important to look to the future and focus our intentions on how the Urban Forestry Committee can continue to work with and better serve the community. For the 2023-2024 fiscal year, the committee will restart the City of Cottage Grove's Urban Forestry Plan, which was put on hold due to staffing changes in the planning division. The benefits of having an urban forestry management plan are many. A plan would provide direction for the maintenance and improvement of the city's urban forest. It also makes recommendations to enhance and improve our city's urban forest now and into the future. Lastly, the Urban Forestry Committee will draft a revised street tree list to be considered by the Planning Commission and then City Council for possible adoption. For example, topics that will be considered during this process are any new developments regarding forest pests and disease, for example, the spread of emerald ash borer, which is known to the state. I would like to finish this address with a quick message about the importance of urban forestry and the city's urban forests, and why we as a committee are being proactive in our actions and planning and really focusing on equity in regards to our urban forest. So I borrowed this quote from another city forester, and he says, through our urban forests, we have many opportunities to reimagine and redefine our relationships between local forests, our built environments, and ourselves. We need roads to get us to our jobs, hospitals and clinics for our health and well-being, and affordable housing to sustain us. Trees can also be a source of job creation, wellness, and a means to create a home. Cottage Grove is a growing community, and we can't deny that. However, we don't have to choose between growth and our green spaces. We can have both and must value both. People in our community need a healthy, livable environment, and trees are part of the solution. So on that, I would like to say a personal thank you to the community of Cottage Grove and to the City Council for allowing me to be a part of this committee for many years. And I've made some really great friends and had a lot of accomplishments during my time here, but I believe it's my time to step aside and allow others to serve the city on Urban Forestry Committee. So this will be my last report out to Council on Urban Forestry Committee, and I will not be applying for the committee again at the end of my tenure. And I just want to say thank you, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Riley. We really appreciate all your hard work. Item B, information regarding the FEMA flood map update. Staff report by Mr. Mongan.
Thank you, Mayor. So in roughly 2009, the city of Cottage Grove was informed by FEMA that our flood maps would be updated. Our current flood maps were adopted on June 1st, 1999, and so at that point in time, it's been just 10 years. However, at that time, the modeling that was used, staff of the day pushed back and said, this doesn't work for us. FEMA listened and went back to the drawing board. We were approached again in 2018 that the preliminary maps were ready to be released. At that time, we had one meeting here at City Hall with all members of the Central Lane County flood districts. That's Lane County, as well. To discuss how the process would work, but then COVID hit. And so everything was put on hold. However, last May, about a year ago, I was contacted by FEMA, stated that they were going to reinitiate the flood map update effective January of 2022. So when they released that information, they sent us this map here. And so this map here that you can see on the screen is the current Cottage Road floodplain map. The orange area is the 500-year floodplain. That's not the area that you need to carry flood hazard insurance. The light blue areas or the dark red areas are areas that you need to carry flood insurance. So light blue being the 100-year floodplain and red being the floodplain.
Settings
Can
are
you
still
hear
the
me?
same.
Okay. Microphone's picking up stuff.
Carry on.
So again, this is the current flood map. So the coast fork here is this red thing here, the Row over here, and then Silk Creek. It's reached out to the west. The new maps, if adopted as proposed, as you can see here, will significantly increase the amount of 100-year floodplain within our special flood hazard area. Of course, staff has been aware of this and done as much as we can. In part, in the process of trying to notify the community of this proposed flood map, we've done Friday updates, ads in the paper, mailed out 1,602 postcards, 2,400 riparian newsletters. Of the postcards, that was everyone that would be affected by the new maps, announcing them and inviting them to an October 19th open house that was held at Cottage Road Rotary. We hosted it here because we wanted to try and do our best to get focus on Cottage Road here. As a side note, I'm also the floodplain administrator for the city of Crestwell. And so I've also facilitated some of their outreach as well. The other 801 postcards were mailed out January 1st. That was the first day of the public comment and or appeal period, a 90-day period that ended on April 19th of this year. So what next? Pick the right map here. So this map here shows the proposed flood maps. Here you can see the various different colors, and as the key indicates there on the left-hand margin, you've got areas where there's a lot of that green, that up to 1 foot flood depth proposed by their maps. To try and address this and really determine if as we use in the language ground truth, the data, staff contracted with our city engineer of record, branch engineering, and had them go take 40 shots around the city. That's elevation shots, and now 88, which is the vertical data used for the proposed maps. I provided just a sample of what that is on the larger 8.5 by 11 sheet that was provided to council. Unfortunately, that didn't really actually get us very far. A lot of the sites that we chose to pick, and there's obviously tons to pick from, largely always happen to be below that base flood elevation, meaning that there would be water there if the maps are accurate. So we regrouped, and I reached out to another firm called West Consultants. That's the other packet here that says technical memorandum. Working with West Consultants, the scope of work included taking a look at all the data that the Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA used to create this model. The data is from 2013 to 15. It was perfected in 2015. And whereas the previous flood maps that were adopted in 1999 used the computer modeling of the day called HEC2, the modeling used for that Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA used for these proposed maps is done through HEC-RAS modeling, which is still a one-dimensional model, but it uses LiDAR data. So it's much more detailed data. A lot of the data from the 99 maps was done by photo, I'm going to mess up the word. Basically, they did aerial flights and using some kind of special lens, they're able to get topography out of it, right? So they can kind of see, okay, river, low, mountain, high kind of thing. You know? And that's how they attain the elevation data for those the current 1999 maps. Proposed maps use LiDAR data, which is the laser-based data system, and a flight that was done by Lane County in 2013. So, talking to West Consultants, asking them to review all the stuff, and I also provided to council this document here. This is the Coast Fork flood study that brought us these maps. In there, it has a lot of the things I just recited to you about, you know, the mapping and when and how, and things like that. But with West Consultants, you know, the real thing I wanted to know is, are these the best maps that FEMA can produce? Is this truly accurate, given the significance of this change? On this map, every one of those polygons, those little red boxes, is a new house that would be brought into the floodplain or other structure of some kind. In total, it's roughly 710, I believe. This would, of course, take some houses out of the floodplain that are currently in, but it puts a significantly higher number into the floodplain. Most specifically, the former Frontier Trailer Park would be completely underwater, and that's a very difficult situation because of the way it's set up. One, land ownership versus, you know, folks that own the park models and vice versa. So it could be definitely difficult and or expensive to insure or monitor. But also, it also encumbers things like the Village Shopping Center. So long since vacant Grocer's Price Chopper or Liberty Lanes or whatever else, they're not in the floodplain right now. If they come into the floodplain, it pretty much is going to be very difficult to do any improvements on there. There's a requirement of the 44 CFR, which is federal regulation for flood damage prevention, that says anytime you spend more than 50 or 49% of the improvement value on making improvements, you have to bring it into full compliance with the code. Doing that on a pre-firm structure or before map structure is almost impossible, just because the construction materials aren't made to get wet. You can wet-proof a commercial structure, you can't wet-proof a residential structure. So that's another element too. So what it would mean for single-family dwellings is, if you want to do one of those big renos and whatever else, you may have to elevate it to get it out of the floodplain. So it's pretty significant. So all that said, and I know it's a lot, we get to I was going to try and show you the image from West Consultants on what would happen if we're successful with our application. Eric spells his name wrong. I very much encourage you all to read this technical memo. It's very well done. It's very simple, but to the point. In some ways, it's complementary to FEMA consultants' work, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, it's just great. Did you notice this here? Did you notice that there? So in a way, we're hoping that it's a little bit catching the flies with honey versus vinegar. And where the map could end up, if we're successful here, would be, as shown in this image, anything that has less than 1 foot would come out. So under the current maps, everything in color here is in. Or the preliminary, I should say, the maps that are coming. If we can at least get it down to this, we'd be looking at removing, I believe, 250 structures. That's probably as good as it's going to get. Unfortunately, we have 2 rivers in town plus Silk Creek. I think Bennett Creek has some influence as well, of course. And the rivers are, at least the coast fork is extremely channelized. There's not a lot of, levees or things like that would require us to basically clear, both sides of the coast fork for, 100-foot plus on both sides, which would be whole neighborhoods in some cases. So it's just really not feasible in that regard. This is really our best effort to try and get FEMA to slow things down and really think about the economic effect of this preliminary map on the city of Cottage Grove. Worked really hard. I provided them with income data, showing the amount of folks that are rent burdened, showing the folks that are, the mortgage rates. If you don't carry a federally insured mortgage, you don't have to buy flood insurance. But it also means that if there's a flood, you've got nothing. But if you've got a federally backed mortgage or a lender that follows the same rules, you got to carry flood insurance. And in cases of houses that are, again, I'll use the term pre-firm before the map, those policies can be $400 a month. And there's really little to nothing that can address that other than elevating the structure out. And even then, because of Cottage Grove's ordinance for flood damage prevention, you can't use fill to elevate in the city of Cottage Grove. It all has to be done on stem wall or post and beam construction, meaning that they still have to carry an insurance policy. It just wouldn't be as expensive. So there's a lot to take in here. Like I said, staff tried really hard. It's unfortunate. When we had the open house, I think I had 1 Cottage Grove resident in attendance. There was about 30 from Cresswell, 10 from Lane County Rural Unincorporated. And so for some reason, it just kind of went right through. The city of Cresswell themselves did not do an actual appeal. I solicited if they wanted to participate in the efforts that I was putting forth for the city, and they weren't interested. But as far as the residents of Cresswell, I think I received 40 elevation certificates from residents basically saying, you guys are saying that my base flood elevation is 635. This licensed surveyor says it's 636, meaning I'm out of shown. That means your model's not great. Don't know if it's going to work, but it's worth a shot.
Councilor Urban.
Thank you for bringing this to us, Mr. Mongan. Few questions. Is this a nationwide rollout of new maps, or is this regional right now?
Mayor, Councilor Urban, this is just Central Lane County. FEMA just goes around and updates maps. The most recent flood map update in Oregon would be out on the coast, Lane County coastal areas. Got new maps, I believe it was 2 years ago. Other ones regionally, I think there was another one in the Scappoose area on the Columbia. That was maybe 5 years ago. And that's just how they roll out. I'm also the floodplain administrator for the city of Drain. And their most recent maps are 2010. So it depends on when they decide that there needs to be a change. Some of those things that can influence that would be development, right? So we're creating more hard surface upstream through development. That lowers the friction coefficients that makes water move faster and not percolate as well or as quickly, and therefore it's just staying in channel and sending it down river faster. So those are certainly things that they weigh when they're deciding, okay, is this community, this region due for a flood map update? Yes or no?
Follow up to that is I think of Louisiana and all those areas that have this repeated kind of situation. Are you familiar with the tactics to abate the the burden of that insurance premium on people going through that? Is that going through senators? So they're fighting at the federal legislative level for assistance?
There certainly are. There's brick grants that exist out there. We're currently updating our natural hazard mitigation plan that might tee us up to be a little bit more successful in an application for something like that. What we could get out of something like that would be where we have known low points. A great example might be the underpass on the connector. It shows conveying a quite large amount of water from the coast fork upstream on the drainage ditch on each side of the railroad. There are products out there that are portable levees that can be put up when the event's coming and hold back the tide, if you will. And so that would get us closer to being successful on something like that. In the case of Cottage Grove, just looking at this map here, that area right here, if we could get the water from coming down underneath the connector here, I think that changes this whole reach as an example.
And if I may, two other thoughts. Do we know the percentage of homeowners or property owners that are under a federally backed mortgage? And then with the idea that Cottage Grove, Lake, Dorina, they're both reservoirs, are classified as flood control ways. Are these calculations based on downstream of that, or factoring in the capacity of those in flood events? Can we appeal to the Army Corps of Engineers to make improvements upstream to mitigate such things?
Thank you, Counselor. I discussed this with FEMA when they were here at the open house in last October. There's a lot of factors that come into play. I think everybody knows more recently that even just last year we had an uncontrolled release at Cottage Grove Lake, but we saw nothing in town. In 2019, after Snowmageddon, we had an uncontrolled release on Row River. Limited flooding in unincorporated areas, but nothing in the city of Cottage Grove. There's a multitude of factors that come into play for riverine flooding, but the majority of them have to just do with the intensity and the saturation. So even if there's capacity in a reservoir upstream to take more water, if the rainfall is just the other side of it, that can do it if it's already a saturated basin.
Counselor Stennett.
I had a couple. I was curious, do we have historical information with regard to flooding in this part of the valley, or would it be useful, do you think?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Stennett. The last event was 1996, 97 storm. The community did see some limited flooding, more specifically down Harrison, I believe. We've got some old photographs, 35 millimeter stuff of that. That was all supplied to FEMA as part of this study. We wanted to say, hey, that's an event y'all called a 100-year flood event. This is what we saw on the ground. And it, didn't move the mountain.
So you had kind of said, it's kind of worth taking a shot with regard to providing independent data back to the agency. And it looks like you guys got this in time within the public comment period. Do we know how that tends to fare? Is this kind of it seems like the most tried and true method to try to influence them. Do we know how other communities are doing at that?
So I did work with our other neighboring entities, Eugene and Springfield and Lane County. We kind of, talked about different approaches. I also talked with Carmen, I can't remember her last name, but she's one of the consultants on the flood map update team. And really, I kind of threw the whole suite at it. She said, bring in concepts of equity and economy and then of course bring in some science. And so that's, really what we were doing. Um, when I talked to Jack Blackman, who's the floodplain administrator for Eugene, he said he had a really good feeling that their proposal to make anything less than a foot, which is the same we're doing here, be 500 year instead of 100 year, was being well received. Um, and so it's hard to say. When I turned in all the stuff um, to them, I got responses, of course, of receipt. They said, "Oh, we'll be back with you in a month." Well, that was a couple days ago, and I haven't heard anything from them. I did send out an email that said, "Hey, I'm going to brief my council. Anything?" I have not heard anything back.
Do you think we're in worse situation than other communities? I mean, we do live between two rivers and basically a wetland.
So the city of Eugene they're currently in a project for Amazon Creek, which is an urban creek that's daylighted in some areas and culverted in others. They had already initiated a project to de-urbanize it. So it's a concrete channel in some parts of town with, concrete sides basically, which is not a great situation for a high water event because it's just ripping through there. That said, it turned whole neighborhoods in Eugene into floodway. So the floodway, to do anything in the federally recognized delineated floodway, you have to do a no-rise certificate. Very expensive hydraulic report, almost the same as that Army Corps of Engineers report. This is a HECRAS analysis. And say, me, and I'm serious, putting new carpet in my house is not going to raise the base flood elevation. Anything like that is considered development. And so it's quite a significant potential hit that Eugene could take. We have some of that here in town as well, not as much actually. It's more favorable to us. Cresswell, that development between the golf course and Tractor Supply, there's 40 homes that would be in the floodway if the maps were adopted as is. And so that's really problematic for the floodplain administrator because it's my responsibility that federal regulations are adhered to, but also for those folks, they want to remodel the house, they want to put a new roof on, they want to do any of that stuff. It affects it locally here, not associated with this flood map update, but just the observation deck across the river here. It's been closed for a year. We tried to determine whether or not it was in or out of the floodway, but as you can imagine, being that it projects out over the river, it's in the floodway. And so even just to replace the rotten members and deck boards, we're having to go through a no-rise analysis.
Councillor Fleck.
So, it's interesting. We're talking about the dams and their capacity to hold water. There's also the risk of a Cascadia subduction event where we could actually lose both of them at once. So, that's kind of the other side of this. I guess you made a comment about not allowing fill. That seems interesting. I know we started a grading, used to be you could grade without a permit. Now you have to have a permit. So how long back does that go? And is that something we should look at? And I'm thinking about, like you were mentioning, the frontier, in a case where you can just lift a mobile home and raise, repave or whatever the case is, that would be advantageous for some of our lower income folks to be able to do something to get them out of that floodplain. What are your thoughts?
Mayor, thank you, Councilor Fleck. So the current floodplain regulation that says no fill in the floodplain, I believe, was adopted in 2017, but don't hold me to that. The reason it was adopted, though, is in order to get credits for our community rating system program. So we're a Class 6 community, meaning that anybody that carries the policy gets a 20% reduction on that premium. So if we were to strike the fill requirement, we would need to do some other enhanced regulation to get those points back. One mechanism for doing that that staff isn't as excited about would be cumulative substantial improvement. Meaning, sure, you could add fill back into the floodplain, but if you, I talked about substantial improvement, new roof, new carpet, drapes, blinds, paint, dishwashers, we would have to keep a tally on all that. And so instead of being one point in time, one project be 49% or less of the value or your substantial, if we would just keep that running total. And once you hit 49%, you have to bring the whole house into compliance with the code.
Yeah, that would be ugly.
Other cities have it, Salem, Albany. I honestly, between us, obviously, the things that folks can buy at Home Depot are pretty much impossible to regulate. Enforcement of that is definitely difficult, to say the least. So it would just take, a lot of trust, a lot of time out in the field, really just observing what's going on. But again, somebody like yourself, counselor, who's come in to install new branch circuits or whatever, all that stuff would be counted under.
Anyone else?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say thank you to Mr. Longman for the incredible hard work. He's put hours and hours into this effort, all to recognize that when these get implemented, it's going to be impactful to our citizens. And I wanted to bring this to council this evening to show that, we haven't sat back, we're just not accepting it, we're working very hard to try to find a way to reduce the burden that's coming our way. So, again, just want to say thank you for the hard work and really doing an excellent job, and fingers crossed that we can see some reduction in that.
Councilor Urban.
Yeah, to share that appreciation and that work. And we were talking earlier, you're saying that possibly this could be implemented in 2024, so people's rates changing could be realized right around the escrow reevaluation cycle.
It's fairly immediate. Okay.
And that was the other part of, do we have a sense of the percentage of federally backed mortgages? Is that data that can be
Counselor,
pulled?
When I pulled that data down from American Community Survey, I wasn't able to tease out federally backed or federal rule compliance loans versus private loans. It just had a more generic, here's how many have trustees, basically, sort of number. So unfortunately, the way FEMA works, I could call them right now and ask how many policies are in town. They don't know how many policies are going to be in town until the maps are.
I guess I don't understand that part.
FEMA knows how many policies we have, how many losses we've had, things like that. And that's data that they'll give to agencies. With this stuff, they haven't looked that far ahead to know, okay, if this map comes in as proposed with those 700 new whatevers, they haven't looked that far into the future to say, this is how many policies there would be. I've asked. I've been very responsive. I don't know.
And that's specifically the federally backed ones, the ones will be mandatory coverage.
Yeah. And there's really no alternative to not participating in the NFIP or National Flood Insurance Program. If the city didn't participate, you would not be able to get a federally insured loan in the city of Cottage.
Thank you again, Mr. Mongan.
One quick comment. I'm sorry. And I would, gosh, folks need to get flood insurance whether they have a federal loan or not, because their policy will not cover them if they're in the floodplain. So, I mean, this isn't even about whether, they have a federal secured loan. This is really critical for their well-being, because if there is an event, they will not get their house rebuilt.
Exactly.
All righty. On to item C, Counselor Subcommittee Appointment for Historic Preservation Commission. Once again, Mr. Mongan.
Thank you again, Mayor and Council. At the November 14th, 22 regular council meeting, council appointed Councilor Stinnett as chair, Irvin and Roberts to the subcommittee to interview applicants to fill vacancies on the Historic Preservation Commission. However, due to lack of applications, the subcommittee has not been able to hold interviews. At this time, we do now have 3 applicants to interview for the 3 vacancies, but Councilor Roberts is no longer on council. Staff is requesting that the council appoint a new member to the subcommittee so that interviews can be held. Again, that's 3 positions on the Historic Preservation Commission. Staff, hopefully we can get it all coordinated quickly, but staff will return on the June 12th, 2023 meeting to present the subcommittee's recommendation.
Thank you. Does anyone want to do it? I'll do it. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Now, item D, Small Municipalities Advocacy Coalition Presentation. That's a mouthful.
That's the thing.
Thank you, Mayor, so to speak, for the invitation to come out and talk with council this evening. Thank you, council. I'm Scott McDowell. I'm the city manager for the city of Brownsville, Oregon. And I have with me Mr. Sean Tate Public Affairs out of Lebanon, Oregon. And we came to talk to you about the mouthful that is Small Municipalities Advocacy Coalition. It doesn't necessarily flow off the tongue. However, the acronym does, SMAC. So I'll refer to it from this time forward as SMAC, if that's okay. Oh yeah, I'm controlling my own slides. Great. Maybe. Do I point it at your computer? That's right. I mean, I would assume. All right. All right. Okay. So, the great General Pericles, First Peloponnesian War, said just because you do not take an interest in politics doesn't mean that politics won't take an interest in you. We just heard a pretty good presentation on FEMA and some federal regulations. It's not really exactly what I'm here to talk about, but certainly implications are there for that. So basically what has happened in the view of some is in 2010, okay, great. I'm just going to say here, Jay. So in 2010, as council is probably aware, the state legislators at the Legislative Assembly started meeting every year. And I think that overwhelmingly, a lot of cities in Oregon, I know certainly the small ones, were a bit overwhelmed by this. It's taken a few years to realize. I've been in Oregon for 17 years as a small city administrator in Oregon, in Brownsville. I've been also in the profession for 31 years. So the League's mission is noble. They try to represent all 241 cities in the state of Oregon. But they do come up against the rural-urban divide. And I know that Councilor Savage sits on that board. And you know, I saw several of you recently at the League of Oregon Cities meeting at the Armory here in Cottage Grove on May 12th. They really are caught really in between an untenable position, again, of the rural-urban divide. And next slide, if you can, Eric, please. So council might have seen this. This was a list sent out by the League, and this is just really just examples of some things that the League sent out. They sent out about 54 or 52 priorities this past cycle, trying to get ready for the legislative session, right? Trying to figure out what their members, the 241 cities, wanted them to do, right? Where do you want us to focus? And so the reason why I'm pointing this out is like number 7. I'm not going to belabor any of these, but attorney-client privilege. And you know, not to be overly sarcastic, but really, like who thought it would be a good idea to take attorney-client privilege away from cities? I mean, some of these things that are happening at our state legislative assembly are tough to swallow. Next slide, please, Eric. And again, you can just see more of the same here. Next slide, please. This is just an example of those things that we took a look at. So as you can see, and as you know, there are a gamut of issues that are facing small communities. Next slide, please, Eric. And so what did that precipitate? The city of Harrisburg, Michelle Eldridge is their city manager. Their council was not pleased with the direction of a few issues, mostly revolving around the number of bills, the sheer number of bills that are introduced every legislative session, and then the league's ability to keep up with them, and then the league's ability to represent everyone in that. So along with Harrisburg, we helped pin a letter that we sent in September of 2022 to the league saying, hey, we would really like to have audience with the league to talk about how we might be heard a little bit more and how we might, make an impact. We had some solutions. We had some ideas that we wanted to share. We know that the league hears this all the time. Everybody's always unhappy. It's, like I said, nearly impossible to keep everyone happy. December 22nd, we had a meeting in Brownsville. Patty Mulvihill, the executive director of the League of Oregon Cities, came down with Jim McCauley, who's the head of their lobbying effort, and Lisa Trevino, who's head of membership services. We had about a 2-hour meeting where we lined out several of our concerns. Some of our concerns included the lack of representation small cities have on league boards. So small cities, 241 cities in the state of Oregon, based on some data I found, 2023 census data, it showed that 241 of those cities, or out of the 241 cities, 202 of those cities were under population of 15,000. So a significant portion of those cities are under that portion. And I don't remember the next slide, but if I could ask you to advance the slide, Eric. Thank you. Okay, I'm not ready for that just yet. But so that's okay. You can stay there. It's fine. Thank you. So one thing that I wanted to talk about from the state level, so a committee, for example. I was on the park board committee for the state of Oregon for about 6 years. And the interesting thing to note there was, again, 12 voting members on that committee, which is great. But it was more like a country club feel. Portland was there, Lake Oswego was there, Sandy was there, Hillsborough was there, Gresham was there, Bend was there, Medford was there, and I was representing every community under population 15,000. And guess how many votes I got? One. I got one vote. I represented 83% of the state, but I got one vote. So I put some debate skills together and got a few things. But anyway, that is problematic on several fronts, a lot of which I'm not going to cover tonight. Out of our meeting with the league, which we felt fairly productive, we agreed on a few things. That advocacy was going to be a priority for our SMAC, and that we were going to need some professional assistance to get there, and that in some cases, in Cottage Grove, I didn't have an opportunity to get through all of your city code to determine whether or not you have an internal policy committee or not, but some cities thought, maybe having an internal policy committee to kind of work through some of the policy issues, whether it be water, flood regulations, wastewater, stormwater, whatever the regulations are, to have some kind of position paper on those positions so that when we met with our legislators, we had an approved by the legislative body talking points so that we could make those points, whether it be Councilor Stinnett contacting or Councilor Fleck or Mayor Salisbury or even Jake, right? Jake Booth. So it wouldn't matter who did it. We would all be speaking basically from the same script. So that's what really laid the groundwork for this. There was an article in the Democrat Herald. Sean gave me a call and said, hey, what's going on? Would you mind having a cup of coffee to talk about this a little bit? And so that's how Mr. Tate and I got involved with each other. Next slide, please. So out of that conversation, this is really the model that we're excited about, right? We're excited about trying to educate and train not just staff members, but counselors to work in the area of advocacy for our small cities. He will help us, and we will help ourselves develop our priorities. It will create alliances across the state, hopefully, that will build a consensus around issues that are germane to each city, right? So Cottage Grove and Brownsville, we might agree if there's 20 policy positions, we might agree on 12 of the 20. That's okay, that's fine, right? Because on the other 8, there might be 30 or 40 other cities that agree with Cottage Grove's position on that. So we're able to identify opportunities for a variety of reasons we'd be able to support each other. Right now, every city is just separated. It's very clunky. There's not, even with the league goes in and fights these battles for us, and then they come to us and say, hey, we're excited. We just heard this. We lost less. We lost less. And I just don't think that that's really where we want to be for Oregonians. I don't really think that's where we want to be for residents, where staff and the council goes back to the, residents and taxpayers and says, well, sorry, but we lost less. It would have been worse, but I don't know. It just seems there's some effort there. So we really are interested in strengthening that. Next slide, please. One big shift in the state too is this shift here. For many years, and I think your staff can attest to this to a degree, the state had a guided approach, right? So Dead Poets Society, we got a nice shot there of Robin Williams. If a city wanted to do something, they could. They could call the State Alphabet Soup Agency, whatever it is, DLCD, ODA, DEQ, and they could say, hey, we're interested in program X, Y, or Z. Will you help us? And the state was really good about coming around cities and helping you execute whatever you wanted to in terms of a policy idea or a model ordinance or whatever it was. My experience, I have to speak from my experience on this one, that changed significantly about 7 years ago. And they started going more toward the Nurse Ratched approach from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is you will do what we say, when we say it, how we say it, which again is pretty hard to stomach in the fact of the way charter government is supposed to work and the fact that we are a charter state. So again, the only thing that we have really to do is to build our own influence. Hopefully one day we can come underneath the league. We just were at the strategic plan rollout. Council Mary Day, Councilor Savage, Mayor Soulsby was there. I think Mr. Boone was there as well. And they're looking at trying to engage with membership in 2026. With 3,000 bills hitting the state legislative floor, I can say that some of my representatives sponsored bills that when I questioned them on it, hadn't read the bill. And I know that it's difficult being a council member when you're getting, I put out an 80, 90 page packet and then there's another 110 or 20 pages online to review for every council meeting. And I know it's difficult for folks who are working full time to even get through that amount of material. So I can't imagine what's happening with some of these bills that are happening. Next slide, please. So representative government, they seem to, some folks are, putting the resent in representative, and government is unlike peppermint because peppermint leaves a good taste in your mouth. So, the bottom line is super simple here. We feel that it's important for us to engage with our elected officials because they have an amazing responsibility to their communities. They have an amazing influence. They have an amazing influence not only in their communities, but amazing influence when they talk to their legislators, right? When they talk to our representatives at the state level to express some of our concerns that have been coming down the pike. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Tate.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Sean Tate, Mayor Soulsby and Council. It's very nice to be here and talking with you all this evening. Thank you for the invitation. Excuse me, I'm kind of losing my voice just a little bit, but I'll do my best. You're going to hate me. I have a lot of animations in my half of this slide deck, so bear with me. If you would move to the next slide, please. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background about myself, just so you kind of have an idea of who I am, where I came from, and how I think. So I'm a born and raised Oregonian. I've been here 52 years. Grew up in the Midland Valley, currently live in Lebanon. Graduated from Corvallis High School. I've spent all but 6 months of my life in the state. I did not come to this business of being a lobbyist and a government relations person due to an incredible fascination with politics. In fact, the opposite, quite frankly, is true. I'm not a political animal. I like policy. I don't like partisanship. I don't typically do partisan work. I like good policy outcomes, and that's my motivation for doing this type of work. Certainly my motivation for reaching out to Scott when I read the newspaper article and saying, my entire business plan is written on the idea that rural Oregon and people who live in rural and businesses that operate and do not have the local representation that they need in Salem.
That being said, I want to make something very, very clear before we move into the presentation. Nothing about what we're talking about here has anything to do with not being a part of the League of Oregon Cities. I appreciate the League of Oregon Cities. I have friends at the League of Oregon Cities. The League of Oregon Cities does good work. The objective here is for us to help them do better work and at the same time improve our visibility and our ability to be a resource for elected officials. Feel free to stop me at any point. This is a pretty short presentation from here on out, but if you have any questions, just raise your hand. Next slide, please. I'm going to need you to hit the button. So just a really quick, these are all things everybody knows, right? And you can hit the button 3 more times. We have the same problems in small communities as we do in big communities. It's often a matter of scale, certainly a matter of budget, a matter of visibility, and a matter of voice. There's very little grace for the differences between big communities and small communities. I hear stories all the time about enforcement efforts being heavy-handed, no matter what the resources are to be able to accomplish those things. I don't believe that our small municipalities are viewed the same way as our large municipalities are, and I think you would probably agree. Rural understanding is at a bare minimum. Most of our policymakers come from, I should say most of our influential policymakers come from highly populated areas of the state. There's not a lot of understanding necessarily about what it means to be a small community. I think a lot of them, and this personal anecdote, I think a lot of them feel like we are quaint, adorable little places to visit, and we get help from other people and in other places. And finally, I don't think that the advocacy model right now for small communities is very effective. The advocacy model right now is that a large organization that has a lot of lobbyists goes out and does the best that it can do for all of the cities of the state. You can hit that button one more time. This is Scott's point. 1 vote for 200 communities. Okay, I think that's a really really good deal. That shows a real lack of understanding of the importance of almost 80% of Oregon's communities having a bigger voice than one person that sits on a committee for 6 years. Next slide. So enter the Small Municipalities Advocacy Coalition. That is the working logo at this point. I did it myself. It's not pretty, but it works for now. Next slide, please. Very quickly, from 30,000 feet, we're flipping the model here. What we're doing is we're putting cities, municipalities back in the driver's seat relative to what state policymakers hear about what your needs are. Thank you. Everybody that I've talked to about this, all city councils, all involved city managers, interested parties are very, very passionate about communicating at the state level with policymakers. There isn't a ton of understanding necessarily about the process and procedure and who these people are and how they do what they do and why they do what they do, and all of those things are important when we talk about advocacy. So we're going to spend some time on that in this process too. Next slide, please. You can hit it one more time. So 3 really important pieces to this model: education and training. That's the phase that we're in right now. Right? All cities and communities that are interested in this will be trained between now and the end of 2023 in advance of the 2024 short legislative session. Okay? We're going to talk about who policymakers are, who they're not, the places where we often relate, some of the misunderstandings that people have about what it's like to be a policymaker. We're going to talk about effective communication strategies with policymakers, how to write collateral material that is going to get read as opposed to get shredded, things of that nature. We're going to work with each city and each council and administrators on developing what their list of policy priorities are, right? And then work that into a larger plan and program. Engagement protocols and procedures, things like how we talk to policymakers, and what do we do when we're in front of committee and things like that. Next slide, please. Strategic council. This is ongoing beyond just training. We will help you with policy analysis and review. The idea being that you see bills, and I don't run a city, right? I'm going to need your help in understanding what a bill means to a municipality, what a bill means to a city, what a bill means to a city council, and then I can help develop strategy around what those things are. Engagement, planning support, touched on that. Communications and collateral development support. You're going to have conversations with policymakers, and you've got a specific issue that you've done. It can help you generate the materials that are going to leave a lasting impression and be something that helps sway a vote. Regular connections with the council, regular meetings, regular appearances at council meetings to give updates on what's happening in the legislative process. And then work on policy development. We'll talk about that in a little bit. One more slide, please. Moving into the short legislative session next year, session support means things like tracking the legislation that gets introduced, right? We won't have 2,985 bills next year. We'll have 400, right? That's the difference between a short session, which was originally designed to help clean up messes that were made in the long session. It's now become a policy session, right? Everybody gets just a few number of bills, and they're biggies, and they're great ones, and there you have it, but it's not 2,900 bills either. We will do logistics support for what I call legislative action teams, or LATs. I think you have a different name for them, which is your internal committees, your policy committees. Legislative action teams for me are the people that we count on from within organizations like this to do the outreach on a policy issue, policy question. So we get people who have that expertise and then help them engage on that issue if it's important. And regular communication, I think I touched on that. Next slide. 2 easy steps, right? Scott, you can fill in some information on this if I leave anything out, but how we are structured is a very basic set of intergovernmental agreements. Okay? This is not a political action committee. We are not raising funds. We are not spending money. We are not backing candidates. We are not doing any of those things. What we are doing is helping councils and cities communicate with policymakers. One more. So the Tate Public Affairs team, that's me and some colleagues that I've identified that have some really good municipality experience, land use, water usage. We'll be doing the training, we'll be doing the support throughout the short legislative session. We are all 24/7 available, which is good, bad, or indifferent, but we're available when you have questions. I think that's it. Go ahead. Next. Yeah. Oh, sure. Also, right. So there's an agreement. Apologize. There's an agreement between, well, the municipalities and the intergovernmental agreement, and then an agreement with Tate Public Affairs. Right. Tate Public Affairs is going to be doing the training. So there's 2 different agreements, 2 different arrangements. Generally very similar. Okay, next slide. A little bit about timeline. You can keep hitting it until one more. So right now we're in the education and training phase, and that goes all the way, like I said, through the end of December. And then we're going to do some session prep to get everybody ready for the short session. That's discussing priorities, making sure that we know what every community is kind of focused on, and that they have the resources that they do it. And then the 2024 short session happens, and that's starting probably in early February and ending, if it goes the way it's supposed to, right? Early March. Never know anymore, apparently. And so in that short session, that is our first opportunity, right, to be visible, to be noticed, to be in the building, and to make an impact. And so there's some strategy behind how we roll out this organization in the building to set ourselves up for future success down the road. Okay, next slide. There's 4 more of those. So after the short legislative session, we'll have a debrief and figure out what we did well and what we need to tweak and what we need to adjust and things like that, and we'll do so. And I mentioned policy development, right? Ultimately, what I'd love to see for second legislative session we're all working on, and that'd be the 2025 long session, is a policy package put out by the Small Municipalities Advocacy Coalition with policies specific to communities within the membership, working with anybody and everybody who wants to have a say in what some of those policies should be. It is not too early to start thinking about those things, even relative to the 2025 session. Sometimes these things take a long time to materialize, and these are complicated issues, right? So, that said, that's kind of the next 2 years as it looks. Oh, okay. Okay, and I think maybe the second to the last slide. Maybe. Yeah. So this is a direct approach, right? This is training and support, and it's not public affairs lobbying for any of these communities, right? I will have the ability as a lobbyist to sit down and have a conversation with a policymaker if that's what you want, but what they really want is to see you. I see them all the time. Okay? We chase them in and out of the building, up and down the stairs, in and out of the elevator, all that stuff. What they really want is they want to hear from people that have the boots on the ground, right? They want to hear directly from the mayor, the council. They want to hear directly from the community. That's what we're going to be facilitating. So based on that and wanting to have a very low barrier for entry, and I hope you agree that those are some pretty low barriers for entry. Those are monthly fees set up to essentially allow as affordable an opportunity as we can for Oregon's smallest communities to be part of this and to get trained and to participate. I think the last slide is just me. I'm not sure. Oh, no, it's not. This is maybe more important. Let's talk about ROI a little bit. What does it look like if we're successful? Everybody that's a member of this coalition goes to Salem. Not everybody every day and not everybody every time, right? But visibly, everybody that's a member of this organization goes to Salem and gets seen and gets heard. Okay, ultimately, we want everybody up there that's meaningful and strategic to us to know who we are. Next slide. Strategic, very focused policy work. What do I mean by that? That means that we're mostly interested in things that are very specific to your communities and your infrastructure as opposed to large hot button policy and issues and that smack partisanship and, quite frankly, start fights and rarely lead to solutions at this level. Next. We need this organization to be visible and to be well branded, right? I'm working on those strategies as we speak, hiring some public relations people to help with the rollout when we do get to the critical mass and are ready to go public with this organization, but that's going to be very, very important too. The communities play a very large role in that. Again, if you're not in the building, right, then no matter of letters that I send anybody, it's going to do us any good. We have to go to Salem to do this. Any more? Well-informed and well-aligned advocacy. This brings me back to the League of Oregon Cities, right? And the gap that we have between what they are able to accomplish and the topics that we need focus on. It is my fervent hope that in doing this, what we're doing is creating an opportunity for the League, as you said earlier, to help us and for us to help the League, right? Understand a little bit better what we think about these priorities and leverage the League's strength, leverage the League's visibility for some of our own purposes, and vice versa. I want to see this be a very mutually beneficial arrangement as opposed to one that where somebody's just trying to be better or beat something else that's out there. That's not what this is. One more? Strategic relationship development. Really, really, really important. There's a lot going on in policymaker world right now. I don't know if you guys know this, but we're week 3.5 of a Republican Senate boycott. Nothing's moved, right? There are 10 senators at this point who are, per the statute that was passed last year by voters, not eligible to run. One of them's yours. It's absolutely right. Although he has a different argument for his. All of that said, what I mean by mentioning that is that there's constant change in this environment, right? And identifying strategic partners is critical. Knowing where those strategic partners are and who's coming and who's going. There's a lot of change in policy and policy makers, right? So it's a bit of a moving target, so to speak. Next slide. And I think this is the big one. I'm going to ask a question, and I hope the answer isn't what I suspected it is, but how many people on council get regular phone calls from policymakers asking them what they think about bills that are in front of the state? Huh. Okay, that's the same answer I get everywhere I talk about this. That's one of the metrics that I want to see change, right? I see it in the building all the time. There are resources recognized by policymakers, right? And we need to be that resource. If it's not the league that's the resource for Oregon's small, rural, and frontier communities, right now there isn't a resource. Right? So let's be that resource and solve problems and answer questions and make sure that they know that they can call us when they want to know what something like this does to a city of 10,000 in the South. That's how you know you're making an impact in the world of advocacy. It is not the number of bills you can pass. It is not the amount of money that you get. Some people measure success that way. That's not exactly how we need to measure success. What we're missing is visibility and being the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. So let's be visible, let's squeak, and let's make some progress. And with that, you can click it. You don't need to see that anymore. But that's just me. Questions from anybody?
Questions? Councilor Flack?
So, I've been doing this a while. You know, I was first elected in 2002. I had a couple of hiccups along the way where I wasn't in office, so my average is still above middle. But I guess, you know, there's some things that jump in right off the bat. So the league, I mean, I've been going to conferences since 2002. And except for one time when they had Art Lakeletter speak, they've been very nonpartisan. I've never seen them take political positions, and I think if they had a hook, they would have used it when Art was speaking. I don't know if you guys remember that or not. Yeah, it was quite the scandal. But I guess the point I'm making in all of that is I'm hearing a lot about policy and I'm hearing a lot about advocacy. But isn't there a risk in a small organization with one wild card counselor or mayor influencing the group? Whereas the league, with 240 cities, if they have one Yahoo that goes and ticks off a legislator, oh, well, that guy's the wild card. It's not a reflection on the organization as a whole. So I guess I have some concerns about the size. I have concerns about what are the policy pieces. I mean, I did a little bit of research, and so I actually have your partner or parties to the agreement where it talks about, you know, that we all agree on policy. Well, just as an example, you know, we are not a small city, according to League of Oregon Cities. That's 5,000 and lower. And in fact, under a lot of state statute, because we're over 10,000, we have a lot of requirements on us that I don't know if any of these cities are over 10, but I don't believe so. I believe they're all under 10,000 population. Is that correct? So, you know, so like I said, I'm just raising some of my flags. I'm not saying that I agree or disagree, but these are answers that I would need before I was willing to jump in, because our reputation as a city is really important to me, and making sure that people who are advocating for something, one, that we agree on the same things, and that two, we're not destroying our reputations with the legislature, who I disagree with all the time. To be honest, I really disagree with the legislature, so I get where you're coming from. House Bill 3414, I think it is, where they're going to actually mandate, once again, not going to impact you guys, but for a city over 10,000, we're going to actually have quotas on housing that we have to build. Well, our city's gone way out of the way trying to build housing, but when I was raising that, poor Mr. Mongan had to listen to me rant and rave about why in the world is the League of Oregon Cities not screaming, and by the .6 amendment they were. But when I read it, it was like, wait a minute, what happened to local control? So, like I said, I'm not saying I agree or disagree with what you guys are proposing, but the devil's in the details. I don't think that the expense is huge, but I guess I would need to know a lot more about what is being proposed. Our city is very diverse politically, and so avoiding partisan issues would be huge. That would be a big piece for me. So, like I said, I guess I'd want to see what the policies are in the direction that this group wants to go.
Two things. Policy is not something I'm suggesting. Policy is something that each community is going to suggest and then follow. We do our trainings and we have our conversations. Part of that exercise is to figure out what it is that the council is supposed to do. None of these things are things that Sean or Scott or anybody else is saying. These are the things that we're doing. Secondly, great point about something going off the rails, right? That risk exists everywhere, no matter what. We are all professionals. Okay? The legislative body recognizes that 1 out of 100, or whatever the number is, right?
Right.
Doesn't quite get the message across in the right way. The rest of us do.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of us maintain professionalism, and we're going to be just fine. I have no reason. Right.
So, thank you, Mayor, Councilor Fleck, excellent. The portion of one of my slides was the internal policy piece, right? So that's why we like to do this by intergovernmental agreement, and then each community does have the resource of Tate's efforts, right? Mr. Tate's efforts, so that Cottage Grove maybe aligns on, let's say, the bill you mentioned, 3414. You're going to be able to see real quickly 12 or 13 mayors that have the same exact stance as this council, right? So phone calls, we're going to increase our influence by being able to say, okay, I've got Mayor Salisbury and Councilor Fleck and Councilor Savage from Cottage Grove. I've got Mayor Duncan from Harrisburg. I've got the mayor from Albany, Mayor Johnson from Albany in the room. We start aligning around those pieces that are important to us, so that we aren't just raging at staff. We're actually in the room with representatives making those salient points with shared voices. So it's much more targeted. As I indicated earlier, it's not, if there's 20 policy positions, we may not align on all of those for the reasons you suggested: size, scale, all of those things. But there's certain things that I think that if we got behind, we could make effective changes on. And everybody tells me you can't. But let me tell you something. Can't never did anything. That's my saying. And I get told all the time, well, you're never going to be able to limit the number of House bills the state legislature. They're never going to go for it. Yeah. Michael Jordan said it, you're going to miss 100% of the shots you never take. I just don't think that some of those things cut across all of that. And I think having the ability to work with cities, because some of the impacts, as you all know, of certain things that have come down just in the last few years, Measure 110, there's a host of them. I don't want to get into all of the measures that are impacted. House Bill 3115. There are many. And those impacts are felt in Cottage Grove just as they're felt in Brownsville. And what we don't share is synergy around that to have our collective voice heard. And, the league did lecture us a little bit, saying that they are a nonprofit, and you're absolutely right, they stay away from that. This, with the intergovernmental agreement, again, gives us more of a strategic way to strike at some of those issues that have probably driven you crazy for 21 years.
So, quick question. Say that our city disagrees with a policy position that even the rest of the group advocates for. How does that articulate it to the legislature? Because, does that hurt our ability to then advocate for what we agree with? I mean, like I said, we've done this with the league for years. We've had important issues that we've gone on. They tried to consolidate PSAPs at one point years and years back. And, we went up to Salem and fought hard to keep our PSAP. So, I mean, there are things we've had to do ourselves. But, like I said, one of my big fears is what if that group that we're now aligned with is actually advocating for something in the opposite direction?
I think you're going to have a lot of diversity in opinion on what policy matter to each community. And that's really by design. What you're citing, I think, is a shortcoming, I think, is actually a strength because it aligns influence, right? What we don't have right now is a lot of cities under population 10,000. No one raised their hand when Sean's question was, how many of you have a personal relationship with your representative, right? It's great. John McCardle, some folks might know who John is, the mayor of Independence, been around he's basically an institution in Independence and practically in the state of Oregon, right? If you call John McCardle, if you ask John McCardle, if you run into John McCardle anywhere, he'll say, hey, influence is of vital concern. Relationship building is of vital concern. We've got probably 80% of communities in this state that have not taken an active role to get active. I know Cottage Grove has, and some cities certainly have. But having more voices in the room are going to impact the legislative assembly positively in our favor, the more voices you have. So even though there's a divergence of opinion, perhaps on maybe a climate change initiative or an issue with homelessness or whatever the issue is, fair housing, middle housing, some of the things the state comes down. Again, trying to drive the state back to that guided approach, right? The Robin Williams, Carpe Diem, seize the day, right? Where you can say, hey, you know what? We really aren't interested in psilocybin in our town. So thank you for giving us the ability to vote. Okay, so real quickly, here's a great example of the guided approach versus the you're going to do it approach, right? In 2014, the state legislative assembly was writing laws in real time over marijuana, right? Recreational marijuana, happening in real time. And we were told that we had to comply. There were no choices, right? The Department of Justice put out some letters. They were largely ignored. Okay, that doesn't necessarily work for Brownsville, but we got blessed with that the same way. And then they did learn the lesson. And then this last cycle in November, communities were allowed to vote on psilocybin, right? You were allowed to vote. And many cities said, we're not interested in setting up that. We feel that path's probably not one we want to go down, right? So we love that second approach, right? And if we could all encourage our legislators, hey, let's let our cities have that ability to go with the charter home rule that has been limited, right, for a variety of reasons. But let's get back that control. Because if I can tell you 100%, if you do not take power and control, you're never going to get it back. They're not going to come and give it. Oh, you've been very nice. It's very great. Yes, here's your certificate. So I think that it's important to rally with those who we do share and align with, and again, trying to create that influence where folks are comfortable knowing how to get on OLIS, the Oregon Legislative Information System, how to research a bill, how to put effective commentary around, how they can get on a website that we'll develop that has positions so that folks can see what the talking points are. So it makes it more easy or easier for a counselor who's got a full-time job to weigh in, right, and present testimony. So all of those things are going to have a cumulative, dramatic effect, in my opinion, on the influence that we collectively have as cities, regardless of what our position is. And I guarantee that we will definitely, over the course of time, disagree on whatever the policy issue is. But again, when the voices are in the room and being heard, I think we get a better, stronger state because of that discussion, right? It really goes right around the diversity, equity, and inclusion that's being pressed right now is let's get those voices in the room. Let's hear them. Because with all the voices in the room, we get better outcomes. And that's really our main aim.
And I'm sorry to keep going. I just one final thing. Do you have any sort of policy positions at this point so far?
Right now, we do not. Right now, what we've done is my council actually tomorrow night is going to hear the recommendations from the Legislative Advocacy Policy Committee that they've created internally. We've identified about 22 areas that we want to write one-page position papers on that we can share with members of our community who are interested, because again, we also have a divergence of opinion being where we're located, very, left, right, independent, whatever, libertarian. Don't forget anyone there. And those positions will be articulated by council, approved by council, and then council members can engage via town forum where, say, Councilor Fleck and Councilor Irvin have a passion, or you decide that you're interested in issues involving the Department of Land Conservation and Development, just as an example. And you guys hold a forum here saying, oh my goodness, this is going to really impact the housing effort that we're done. We want to inform the citizens. You have a forum here. You folks have followed it. You've worked with Mr. Tate. You have a presentation. He comes down and you share your issues with the community. And then you determine who are the stakeholders in our community that could be impacted by this. Is it the Chamber of Commerce? Is it just the regular citizens? Is this just a council issue? Where are we going to put that policy and where are we going to put that drive? So that's all done internally so that, again, the council as a body is working collectively representing the citizens, right? So it's an onion and it's difficult. There's many layers to it. But I think with that, it also rounds out what the values Cottage Grove has from policy to execution. So I think that addresses that.
Thank you.
Mayor and Council Fleck, the idea that there's disagreement among these like-minded groups. Most of the work that I do for the clients that I have is coalition. Right? I represent a hospital system. I represent a medical school in Lebanon, and they're involved in larger coalitions. Imagine 15 hospitals in a room that all don't like the same policy, right? Because some are big hospitals, some are small hospitals, big towns, small towns, you get where I'm going. There are processes and procedures for people to figure out what they can agree on, what they don't agree on, what to recuse themselves from, things like that. We are all going to need to approach this with a sense of we are all on the same team. And I believe that we can do that and we can handle any major policy differences that we have between communities and not step on each other's teams. See it happen all the time. Conflict.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Councilor Stennett.
Thanks. So how many communities do you have involved so far?
6.
Okay. How many do you hope to get or might reasonably expect to get? Do you know?
I think reasonably, we're ambitious. We would like to be in triple digits by the end of the year. We would really like to reach out. We know I've been since this has hit the paper and since this has come out, we've talked to many people informally. I've been building a very rudimentary website so that we can get the main points out there. Councilor Flex got the intergovernmental agreement from that because I saw it. So folks can get on there really quickly. 25 or 30 minute read. You can kind of see what it's about, how it's structured, and then we'll be contacting mayors and councils to see if they're interested in pursuing it with word of mouth, basically. Mr. Tate knew Candace. Mayor Soulsby. And then we have many city managers that we already are acquainted with and who we've talked to. So we're going to spread it that way. And so that's the plan.
And I guess the membership dues would cover whatever the efforts end up being. And that would basically be through your agency. Would you be taking some, it would seem like you'd be, how many communities would kind of form your market rate in terms of what you tend to do? And I hope that's not a personal question.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, I guess if you're taking kind of a discount to do this because you're passionate about it, that's great. But I think volunteer help is great, but it comes up against the limitations of people's real lives. So does taking a discount on something because you believe in it. Like you have to get paid too. You run a business. I would be concerned that eventually you're going to have to kind of let some things slide so that you can pay your bill.
I have modeled this out. I'm very comfortable with the pricing structure and with my bandwidth. I have lots of time to devote to this. Not married, no kids, no dog. So I don't sleep. I think about this stuff most of the time, and I eat ice cream late at night. So it was sorry, but you get my point. I have a lot of hours to give to this. This means a lot to me. This is a fair market rate for the work that I'm going to do over time. To get there, this is quite frankly, I want to see. I'd love to see 100. I'd love to see triple digit. 40 or 50 would be a wonderful number for us to go into short session. Anything over that would be fantastic. When I need help, I will get help. I have some colleagues lined up ready to help me with trainings and presentations and policy analysis when it comes to really important infrastructure things. So does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Thank you for presenting this evening and for getting your show worked out. I'm glad that we were able to work that out. You had mentioned that you were on a board for 6 years. Can you remind me of what that board was? Was it with the state of Oregon? Or
It was. Yeah, it was with the state of Oregon. The state of Oregon's Park and Rec Board. So all the state lottery money that comes in is filtered through a board, and they rank, I'm sure maybe Cottage Grove has applied for that in the past, take the state lottery dollars, and they divvy that out, based on the criteria that are found in the state's plan. And like I said, it was a 12-member board when I served.
And when was that? Are you still currently serving?
I'm not. I served from 2010 to 2016, I believe. The pandemic screwed up my math. I could tell you the date I started and everything, but those 2 years have got me still a little foggy, but 10 to 16.
I was curious because my history with the league is short.
Mhm.
Right? I was just appointed to the board at the December meeting and started as a voting member in January. And I see lots of diversity from little tiny towns all the way in Eastern Oregon, Nassau, to little itty bitty tiny little Fossil, to North Plains. So I'm seeing a lot of redundancy of what is being offered to what is currently offered, but it's not a bad thing, right? There's beautiful partnerships. It just, it could be a more specialized thing, but there's also other things that are offered too. Out of the list of 45 that we all had to pick our top 7 or whatever we were done, those may be the talking points, but I assure you that the league is working on all 45 of them. So behind the scenes, that is absolutely happening. It is not, these are the ones that are being worked on. It's really the whole thing. It's just these are the ones that they're reporting back on. These are the ones that came back from the 241 cities, with apparently 88% being small city, saying this is what we want also. So I kind of take that into account. $500 a month, I guess, could seem a little cheap. I don't know if we can't be a member of the league, but it seems like it's not much more than that. So it's interesting to compare it. I know it's apples to oranges. It's interesting to compare financially what the benefit is with the league, because there's all sorts of committees that you could join as a part of the league. There's policy committees that are coming out. Applications are coming out soon for community development, energy and environment, finance and taxation, general governance and human resources, telecommunications, transportation, water and wastewater. So all of these are really amazing opportunities to have those small voices also. So just in case you
Right.
didn't know.
And well, no, we do know that. And so when we sat down with Patty, that was where that suggestion actually came from, was our meeting. We basically said, look, you have to do a better job getting small communities represented on these policy committees. And that's what you heard Friday, May 12th at the Armory. They were committing to us in that they were going to start doing that better, right? But when I look at the timeline and I see 2026, I'm not. That doesn't make me feel good. That doesn't make me feel good. And the strategy of we lose less, I can't accept that. I've been an administrator in this state for 17 years, and there are things we Oregonians have an opportunity to make some things better. And yes, the league offers things that we will not, right? The training that they do, the conferences that they do, there's things that's absolutely true. But one of the things that they targeted to get better based on kind of what we were talking about, is trying to get this in 2026. And it's like, I don't know if we can wait through 2 more short sessions and a long session without our voices being actively heard and creating our own influence.
Could be, so these policies are for 24 and 25. They're short policies also. The other thing
Right.
is there's 2 other coalitions that have generated outside of the league. I'm just wondering if you guys have talked to them. There's the MMC and CCO, and I'm looking for, do you know what I'm talking about? The Metropolitan Mayors Association. Metropolitan Mayors Consortium, and then there's also the Central Oregon Cities Coalition. So both of those consist of 2 different groups of folks who are similar, where it's a dues process, and they have a lobbyist that kind of works with those more specialized needs. This is not anything against, like you guys also said, it's more specialized per se. So I'm curious if you've talked to anybody who's been a part of that.
I know those folks. I know their audience. It's their audience. What he does for them, I understand, is so they would certainly be open and happy to have them join our coalition. They have representation and they're comfortable.
And then one final question, just out of pure curiosity. What brought you here tonight?
I asked the mayor if I could come by.
So I actually, I don't know if you were there. It was a chamber breakfast, and that's where I met Sean. And he just sounded really interesting to me. And actually, Lynn Blackstone introduced me. And so we just sat down and started talking, and he told me about this thing that sounded like something that we might want to talk about. So that's how it all came about.
Thank you for your question.
Councilor Irvin.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Can you educate me and the rest of the council on the entry points into that discussion with law policymakers? What I'm hearing is that one of the unique parts of the model is to train the closer to the ground people to come and actually have that voice. I have to compare that with experience. I think it was with the National League of Cities at the time. Having this opportunity to talk to one of our Congress people back in, or a couple of them in DC, and that certainly didn't go as I would hope. So I know we had a good discussion on that. What does this look like? What is the can you set a real expectation? Is
I
there?
appreciate that question. Who's been to the state capitol in the last 6 months? Good job.
I should go if I think that it would be worthwhile.
So the state capitol is under a horrible construction process right now. It's about 80% of it that's closed off to the general public. But what you can still do in Oregon on any given day, once you walk through the metal detectors on the state street side of the Capitol, is go walk up to anybody's office. And 9 times out of 10, you might find somebody in the hallway and be invited to have a conversation since you're council. You don't get that much. Heard of, not been to, but heard of meetings where people sneak out the back doors of their office before the constituents come in and meet people with staff, and this kind of thing happens all the time, right? We're going to generate personal relationships with staff. We're going to generate personal relationships with policymakers. That you can do here. You don't get to do that at higher level, not with the ease, right, with which we can do that here. So does that sort of answer your question in terms of is this going to be like what it's like in Washington D.C. essentially.
Well, yeah, so a better picture is formed there. And I guess that does raise a similar concern to, I might, if I was in that position, become quite tired and start ducking out if that interrupted my work, like what needed to get done. What are the safeguards against, just hordes of counselors coming in to talk to representatives?
There are no safeguards, and that's the way the Capitol works. On any given day, you're going to see 150 people wearing a purple T-shirt and walking into anybody's office. There's door they can, right? That's
Well, and we have talked to our representative on a few things, and the amount of special interests that are there bombarding them with messaging on every single day is vast, and our voices are.
So the sell is they would genuinely be more interested to hear from people in this position rather than special interests.
They're yearning for it, without question. Now, we are a special interest, right? We are a very specialized group of municipalities. We are a special interest. Let's not get caught in with a special interest. We want them to care about our special interests, right, so to speak. But these are the conversations that they show up and say to have. All of our policymakers, to the best of their ability, are really, really interested in learning about constituents. They'd rather learn about it from you than from you. Will be openly invited into offices and say, and you won't be wasting any minutes.
Anyone else?
Do we know what the dues are?
Gonna answer it.
Yes, you were asking about dues.
Yeah, the league, I have that as a question. The League of Leagues.
Oh, with the
current
League of
league's
Oregon
dues.
Cities.
And is that per counselor, the 500, or per
No,
city?
that's
The city.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to answer that.
So on the topic of the dues for the League of Oregon Cities that we pay, it's by population. So of course, Portland pays a whole bunch, and Greenhorn pays very little. But in our case, I don't have the exact number, but it's just a little above $9,000 a year. So it works out to between $650, $700 a month, roughly, very roughly.
So those are dues. Are there, and then if we go on conferences, there's airfare,
Yeah,
all that kind of
we pay
stuff.
for the individuals to go to the
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Really appreciate you taking the
appreciate your
time.
time. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Item E, concerns from council. Councilor Fleck.
So just briefly, I meant to look up what we did at LRAP because, to be honest, I don't remember. But I had LRAP and Lane Erie Commission on Transportation meetings this last couple-week period. The Lane Act has something interesting they're bringing forward. They're asking all of their participant agencies to come up with a wish list of road projects that we'd like to have. There's no funding. This is just what if there were some funding to all of a sudden become available. So this is kind of your wish list projects. They do not have to be federal, or state facilities like 99 or other projects. It could actually be city projects and streets or signalization or whatever transportation related issues we may have. I've given this to our public works director, and I think we have 3 months, I think it was, to kind of come up with a list of 4 or 5, if I remember right, projects.
First part of July.
Okay. So that's kind of an intriguing idea. I mean, I kind of hate to waste staff time when there isn't funding, but then again, if it's not overbearing for staff, I think it's nice to have. In fact, even if we're looking at our capital improvement plan and we're looking at our projects, we're going to be doing similar work anyway. So I think that's going to be a real advantage for us. Thank you.
Anyone else? Counselor Stennett?
Thank you. Forgive me if this is a dumb question. I was wondering, do we study traffic volume outside of the specific need for a project or some kind of mandated need from another agency?
Yeah, we do. So in 2015, the city adopted a transportation system plan for the city. So in the creation of that transportation system plan, you analyze, hired a consultant to analyze trip counts, various different things of transportation related at that time. But since then, most of them are strategically on specific applications that come before the planning commission.
So it might just be a curiosity. I have two daughters. I'm basically a pack animal and a chauffeur. Main Street is a parking lot these days, and I just don't.
Yeah.
Is that connector stuff?
Councilor Stennett,
Okay.
The impact of the connector and essentially Highway 99 north of Main Street being essentially closed has caused that wonderful traffic nightmare on Main Street, and then it gets doubly or triply compounded when there's a train, and you'll have folks packed clear up to Thornton Lane on that strip. So the light at the end of the tunnel is that I heard Wednesday morning or sometime Wednesday, and then it will be open back up. So hopefully we will see our traffic patterns kind of go back to what they were pre-closed 99 connector.
So I live off 21st, and it took 13 minutes to get here the other day. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
Counselor Urban?
Thank you, Mayor. Two thoughts. One sparked by that comment was the parking study. If I recall correctly, the last one we did was in an anomalous season, and we're in another anomalous season apparently and Wednesday is not the total completion of the project, right? It's just opening of the connector. But so after there's normalization of traffic flows, I'd love to see another traffic study because beyond the closures up there, I've also observed increase in traffic and talking about downtown improvements, the ability to park near to the places that you want to be is important, and I'd like to see an updated study on that, if possible, or brought back for consideration. And then the other part is just in community conversations and different groups, kind of all working towards similar ends. I'm just noticing there's like a lot of like good community-based questions that are coming up, like, do we want this or should we go for this? And I know that's happening, and the subject of like a community survey keeps rising, at least in my mind, and I know it's been brought up where one needs to be commissioned. And I'd love for coordination from the chamber to different groups in town that have pertinent community questions that need to be answered for them to move forward, in a good supported direction. Maybe we could collaborate and do a massive, it doesn't have to be massive, but a coordinated community survey. So I just want to voice support for that and see if there is support and watch for the appropriate time to make that happen. And I wouldn't know when that is exactly, but I'm sure people in this room do. So those are the two things I had.
I just want to remind everyone that on Monday it's Memorial Day and that we are having an event at the Armory, and I believe that starts at 11 o'clock, and I'd love to see everyone there. All right. Business from the city manager. So, Mr. Boone?
The only report I have for you today is that the city manager, Mr. Myers, is feeling rather under the weather today, which is why they're stuck with me instead. So that's all I've got right now. I'm sure we'll have more.
Okay.
Mayor, comment?
Yes.
I haven't been able to connect with Jesse, but I wanted to see, we've set our first ad hoc meeting for this Thursday, starting at 6 here in City Council. Is that something that you can put into your schedule? If not, you'll be able to do Zoom too. So we're looking forward to your participation in that group.
I can't make it to that meeting. Will they all be on Thursday evenings?
No, hopefully at this meeting, we'll try to get some availability for the months of June and July and do a little bit better job. I think with the throes of budget and everything else, and there was a desire to try to get a meeting done before the end of May to kick us off. So we'll work hard to try to accommodate as many people that can be there in future events. And if you got specific days that are better for you, you just let me know, or Tina in the planning department, we work hard to try to know that and schedule accordingly.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Faye. All right. No city attorney, and so now items removed from consent agenda, and now we will go into the executive session. So, the City Council for Cottage Grove will now meet in executive session to consult with staff designated to negotiate real property transactions. The executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.660E, which allows the council to meet in executive session, deliberate with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. At the end of executive session, we will return to open session, welcome the audience back into the room, and adjourn the meeting. If there's anybody else to be let back in, or
There has been somebody, but they keep disappearing. Yeah.
all right, no one.
Go back into a regular session.
You got it.
No one. All right, so this meeting is back in regular session, and now it is adjourned.
Sorry.